Hello, my name is Mara, and welcome to Books Like Whoa. We have made it to the 5th book in my Project Poirot series, and today we are talking about The Big Four from Agatha Christie, featuring, of course, Hercule Poirot. This is going to be an interesting one to talk about because upon doing a little bit of research, it turns out that I may be one of the only people who really loves this book. And I feel especially embarrassed about that because I think that I recommended this as a good audiobook to start with Agatha Christie, but I mean, even though other people apparently don't like it that much, my assessment still stands. Even upon re-listening and reading some of the criticism, which I think is probably valid, I happen to really enjoy this particular book. But before I get too far ahead of myself, let me just catch you up on where we are in case you haven't been following along. Now, this is going to be spoiler-free in terms of major plot stuff, so feel free to keep watching even if you haven't read this book yet. But anyway, summary. So we start the book off with Captain Hastings coming back from the Argentine, which is where he lives with his wife, and he's going to surprise Hercule Poirot and say, hey, look, I'm going to be in town for a few months taking care of business. But when he goes to Hercule's apartment, he finds, oh my gosh, Poirot's about to leave to go to South America to see him, basically because he's gotten an amazingly, very lucrative offer to go do an investigation for the American billionaire Abe Ryland. So, shenanigans ensue, and basically what they come to realize is that this kind of cross-purposey moment may not have been an accident. So this seems a little suspicious, and those suspicions are pretty quickly confirmed when this half-dead guy comes running into the apartment, and he starts blathering on about the Big Four. And basically the first person in this Big Four is kind of referred to as the brains, the second one is the money, the third one is a French woman, and the fourth one is the Destroyer, which is actually, I was listening to the audio, and that is how that name is read and always referred to as the Destroyer. So, yeah, that's number 4. And still, they're a little suspicious, but Poirot was like, oh, I gave my word, I've got to go take this case, I will see you back in South America in a little while. So they're on their way to the train station, and I forget exactly the order of operations, but basically they come to realize that the guy who had come to see them is dead, and it's very suspicious, and all of a sudden Poirot kind of realizes, oh shit, they're just trying to get me out of the country. Whoever this Big Four is, I'm not falling for this. I'm staying here in London. So basically, the rest of this book is sort of a series of adventures that Poirot and Hastings go on, or kind of a series of unsolved mysteries that they are working on. And they all have a connection in some way or other to this mystery of the Big Four. And basically what the Big Four are sort of just these weird, vague bad guys who want to watch the world burn, I guess. Basically they want to create chaos so that they can benefit off of this financially. And if you look at this time in history, I think The Big Four is one of the last novels that she wrote in the 20s. It's right at the late 20s, early 30s. And, the world is in a lot of sort of heightened unease, and there's a lot of, wars and rumors of wars type stuff happening, and basically everybody is very stressed out that there's going to be another world war, because to be honest, the First World War didn't really resolve what some of the key core issues were in terms of the dynamics between the various world powers. And so there's just a lot of anxiety, and I think that this is essentially a novel sort of playing on those interstitial war anxieties. And I see why people don't like this book. So here's the main criticism, is that it's very improbable to a large degree, and that it's very kind of disjointed, because they're always going on these various sort of little side quests, basically trying to get to the big bads, who are the various members of the Big Four. And so it reads almost like a series of short stories, but again, I love Agatha Christie short stories, as we have documented, so that might be a part of why I like it, is because it's not a big overall mystery, it's a series of small ones that they're kind of solving, and it has this sort of element of international intrigue, which, again, I know a lot of people don't like in her writing, but I personally really enjoy books of hers that are more sort of on that action-adventure spectrum and not even just a straight mystery. I will say, the thing that this book, honestly, the biggest kind of reflection that I have on this book is trying to sort of puzzle out I think this book was a reminder to me of why reading diversely is important in terms of from own voices, authors, and such, because this book is quite dated in terms of the way that it's talking specifically about China and the East, and it's very of its time. So I don't want to sit here and be like, no, Agatha Christie, like, why aren't you being more, racially sensitive and culturally sensitive and not trying to appropriate these various tropes that we know are just stereotypes, yada, yada, yada. Because, okay, you have to live in the reality. Like, you can't expect somebody who was born in, I think, like 1890 into immense privilege, into the British Empire at its height, to be particularly sensitive to the dynamics of like colonialism or racism or whatever. Like, that is not a realistic expectation to put on the author or on the text. So I don't want to say that, but I think what it did make me reflect on was how glad I am that we are moving increasingly as a culture and as sort of like a book culture to understanding why it's important for people of various demographics who have not been well represented in literature to be able to write their own stories and speak for themselves. And I don't know, I even thought about this book made me want to make a video about why diversity is actually important and not just a box that we check off. Which I may do, but I also feel like that's stepping into some very interesting waters sometimes here on the internet. So anyway, that was sort of honestly my biggest takeaway, was like, ugh, this like weird exoticism of the Far East and like these sort of all-knowing Chinese figures who I think are meant to be mysterious. And I even wonder if Agatha Christie felt like she's treating them with respect, because she is crediting them with a lot of like ingenuity and capability and cunning, but it ends up being, and forgive this phrase, but this is sort of what this trope is called, very much like the magical Negro thing, where Asian characters are portrayed as being all good or all bad. Like they aren't allowed to have like a nuanced portrayal. And again, that is a high expectation for this text considering when it was created. But as a reader of today, I can't help but sort of have those feelings or think those thoughts. And that being said, I do think that plays into kind of the ongoing conversation we've been having in this series, right, about the sort of xenophobia of Britain at this time. And, I think that this is a story that just sort of perpetuates that in a lot of ways, and there's a lot of discussions of the outsider and outside influence. And I think almost sort of just like an anxiety about globalism might be a good way to talk about this, because there's this sense of menace coming from the fact that number one is a Chinese person, number two is an American, number three is a French woman, and number four is a British man. It's very, this idea of like part of what makes them so scary is how sort of like their reach is so total and so global. So I wonder if I think that this is a relevant kind of piece of the discussion of the fear of the outsider, is not just a fear of the outsider in the traditional sense that sort of has always been a part of British culture, but I think it's being ratcheted up because they're, throughout the 20th century and throughout today, an increased sense of, well, where is an individual person, where is their place, not just in the scheme of a country anymore, but in the scheme of an entire world, where the entire world is becoming more kind of available and accessible. And I also think that this sort of belies a little bit of sort of hocus pocus fear about the rise of science and the kind of the mechanization of war, because there's a lot of discussion of sort of the different technologies that are being developed and what those might mean if given into the wrong hands. So, in World War I, we definitely saw the first time tanks are used in war. We saw it's really the last war that was fought on horseback because cars are coming in. The horrors of mustard gas and sort of chemical technology to inflict damage. So I think that kind of specter is also here, and I think that there's some sort of lingering anxieties about what that means and how that could affect people. I think there's a sense that as technology becomes better, it's positive in the sense that it does good things for our lives, but you know, with World War I so near in the rearview mirror, there also can't help but be a little bit of anxiety about, okay, technology can make life great, but it can also make life miserable in the context of war or in the context of the wrong people. And then just one last thought on the continuing theme of this series, which is what you see isn't always the truth. There is the sort of, I think there's a very direct metaphor about that in this book, because number 4, the Destroyer, is called the Destroyer because he essentially is an actor who can blend in anywhere. So Hercule Poirot and Hastings encounter him many times throughout this book, but he's always disguised and they can't recognize him. So this is particularly galling to Hastings, and he feels just very like, why can I not, like, I've met this guy 5 times, how can I not recognize him? And again, it's this whole thing about how just because somebody looks a certain way, you don't really know what's in their heart or what their motives are. And you know, Hastings finds that very galling, but so does Hercule Poirot. And you know what? I think part of what I also like about this book is that Poirot messes up a lot in this one. So he's not just sort of, it's never that he's omniscient in any of these books, but he does have sort of like a very justified arrogance that he always is sort of one step ahead. And this is a book where that's not the case. Like, he's much more human, he's much more fallible in this book, and it takes him a long time to figure out like what the fuck is going on and what he should be doing about it. So I also think that that adds a nice new layer of characterization to Poirot and to the dynamic between Poirot and Hastings. So yeah, I totally get why people don't love this one, but I like it. It works for me. It hits a lot of my kind of sweet spots in terms of what I like about Christie's writing. So I'm actually going to give this a 5 out of 7 unicorns on my scale, which means I think it's a really good book, or a 4 out of 5 stars on Goodreads. So again, I just think that this one's really good. And in terms of like my little listicle over here, I would personally, like this, again, this is not in terms of the best books by her, but just what I'm enjoying the most. I would put this above The Murder of Roger Ackroyd, which I know is controversial because The Murder of Roger Ackroyd is largely considered to be one of her very best books, but I just don't enjoy it in the same way that I enjoyed The Big Four. So I would put it, I guess, at number 3 so far in the books that we've read to date. That being said, none of these are bad books. Like, we have not yet hit one that I don't like. We will soon. But for now, I like all of these books, and so this is really just kind of getting into the nitty-gritty and getting picky about things. But I think that will do it for Project Poirot for this week. If you have read this book, definitely let me know your thoughts, because like I said, I think I'm in the minority, and if you're one of the people who are like, girl, no, this is not a good book, I understand, and I disagree, but I get it. I get that I'm in the minority on this one. So let me know your thoughts below. If you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, follow me on the social medias if you are so inclined, and I think that will do it. I hope you're having a great day. Bye!